Okay, good morning. This presentation is being recorded. And so I would like to, I'm sorry, I apologize. First of all, my name is Hyro McMeekin. My pronouns are we, he, him, and his. I currently, in this capacity, represent the North Carolina Student Success Center for the North Carolina Community College System Office. I work directly for our new executive director, Dr. Dolores Ali. I'm not sure if she's on the call. She may be.
I am on the call. Hi, Rose.
Hey.
Good morning.
Hey, good morning. Good morning. I don't know if you would just want to introduce yourself to the group and then we can get started.
Yes, I do appreciate the opportunity to introduce myself. Good morning to everyone. Welcome to this session. This is my first in this capacity, so I am looking forward to learning about the format, learning more about the participants. Thank you all for putting your role and your names in the chat. That will help me tremendously. And Hyro, I'm glad that you think a lot of me because I am not Dr. Ali, but I love that title. I love it. I love it. So Dolores works well. So thank you tremendously. That's encouragement. So I guess I need to get that checked off my bucket list, huh?
Gotcha. Yeah, I apologize. Okay, I got you.
No problem.
I got to go.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, this is wonderful. Thank you so much for the opportunity to give greetings and to introduce myself.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. And so we appreciate y'all being here today. And I'm going to do a quick introduction, just some housekeeping. This will be recorded. We usually have it available after it processes, and we usually get that to folks. We'll do a post assessment at the end as well. So I'll put that link in there as well. I'll be moderating the chat for Dr. Query. So as she is speaking, if there's like questions, feel free to put them in the chat, and then we'll try to get to them as we see them. If there's some big questions, we usually try to save them at the end, or she'll let you know that she'll save it towards the end, okay? And so it's my pleasure to introduce her today. So Dr. April Query serves as the Regional and Community Services Manager for the College Foundation of North Carolina, where she has worked since 2006. She's a three-time graduate of UNC Wilmington, go Seahawks, earning her bachelor's degree in political science, her master's degree in public administration, and a doctorate in educational leadership with a concentration on higher education. Her research areas include American Indian students in the public education system and the process of paying for college. She currently resides in Wilmington with her husband, 4-year-old son, and 1-year-old daughter. And with that being said, I'll go ahead and turn it over.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. And I'm excited to have you all here. This is a really specific topic. So this is usually not one where we have 1,000 folks join, just because it's, like I said, it's very specific. So we are going to talk about a good bit of information this morning. And Hyro already went over some of this stuff. There's my family and I, and some background on me. So I'm excited to bring you all this information today and just overall have a good conversation about American Indian students in higher education. We're going to talk a little bit about why we want to study American Indian students. So why is this important to begin with? Why should we care? And then we're going to talk a little bit about some research and also a study that I completed that specifically talks about how American Indian students pay for college. And we're going to talk a little bit about themes from student interviews done right here in North Carolina, and how they view financial aid and how they came to learn about financial aid and how to pay for college, as well as recommendations from research. So I'm a big believer in not just talking about the problem, but talking about ways that we can help solve the problem. That's even more important in a lot of ways than talking about, what the issue might be. Okay. All right. So let's talk a little bit about why we want to study American Indian students. So just kicking us right off the bat here, American Indian students are among the most underrepresented and underserved group of students in the U.S. education system. So probably no surprise there. And in addition to that, we have more students self-identifying as American Indian in the U.S. Than ever before. So that means that the American Indian students are becoming a larger share of the U.S. population, right? If we have more students self-identifying as American Indian. Yet at the same time, their enrollment in higher education has decreased, and it's continuing to decrease. So if we look at 2005 through 2013, there was an 8% decrease in American Indian students heading to higher education nationwide. And it's the only racial group in the US who experienced that decrease in enrollment during that same time period. And if we look at past research, which we're going to talk a little bit more about that in just a couple minutes, it's clear that financial aid plays a role really in any student's decision to enroll in higher education, but also for American Indian students. Okay, so the research we're going to talk about this morning seeks to understand what role financial aid plays in higher education for students. Okay, all right, so let's look at a little bit more data before we dig into some stuff. So in 2013, there were 162,000 American Indian students enrolled in higher education nationwide. And we're going to compare that to some other minority groups. So we have 2.8 million African American students enrolled in higher education that year, just over 3 million Latinx Hispanic students enrolled in higher education, and 1.2 million Asian Pacific Islander students. So I think it's important for us to look at these numbers and compare to get a feel for the big picture. American Indian students represent just 1% of all college students, and they have the lowest college graduation rate. So not only are we not getting our American Indian students to college, but we're also not getting them through college to graduation. They're not reaching completion. And there, to be honest, there's been little research done to understand how American Indian students receive financial aid information and utilize it to pay for college. And if we think about all of the access issues as a whole, a lot of these access issues come into play for a lot of different racial and ethnic groups in the US. But if specifically looking at the research that has been done for American Indian students, other access issues or access issues as a whole include family support, which we're going to talk about in a few minutes. It turns out that plays into financial aid. Academic preparedness or lack thereof, which I know a lot of our higher education institutions see among all students. That academic preparedness piece or not quite being prepared. Personal and institutional commitment. So we'll talk about that a little bit when we get into recommendations for implementation things on your campus, as well as campus climate and then financial factors as a whole. And so these are some of the things, if we're looking at research done maybe in the last 20 years that's coming up for American Indian students that impact access into higher education. Okay, so let's talk about this study here so we can understand when we get into recommendations at the end of this for the campuses, we can understand where they're coming from. Okay. And so, like I said, there's been very little research done on American Indian students and specifically related to financial aid. And that's an important piece. That was an important piece to me, just based on my, experience. And then also knowing that that is a piece of the access issue that has not been touched a whole lot. Okay. So thinking about, this study, I interviewed multiple American Indian students at a couple of different higher education institutions in Southeastern North Carolina, multiple interviews. And the students range from freshmen on campus to juniors, okay, on the college campuses. And students answered some questions about, I have them listed here. So how and why they came to learn about financial aid for college. Now this is a success model. Okay, so we're taking this from a positive approach right from the beginning. These are students who have persisted and they were able to work through the financial aid process because they are currently students on campus. So the idea with a model like this is to look at success factors and understand how they can be repeated for other students. So how did they come to learn about financial aid? Who did they learn the information from? Was it mom? Was it a teacher? Was it the neighbor? How did you learn about how to access the financial aid process? What methods and materials were used when learning about the information? So was it a presentation? Did you have a conversation? Did someone give you a handout? Did you get taken to a website? And then how did financial aid affect their transition into college? Okay. Thinking about this research also, it was constructed using narrative inquiry, which essentially just means that we have these questions, but the idea for the students that also goes along with Indigenous research methods is to allow the students a chance to tell their stories. So this is not I ask you a question and you answer it. And if you want to keep going, I cut you off because I have a question I have to get to and I need you to answer it. That's not the way this type of research goes. So it's a chance for students to tell their stories. And then you're looking for common themes and what out of their stories can I pull out to understand, the data, and like I just said, common themes. And so this is where we're at. What did we learn from their stories? 5 common themes emerge from student interviews, and these themes also are 100% in alignment with other research, literature reviews and data. So we have 5 things we're going to focus on for the rest of this morning. Parental involvement. We're going to talk about the importance of communication, personalized assistance, stress and planning, and transitional experiences. And a lot of these things that we talk about can be used with lots of other students that we're working with also. Okay, so thinking about the findings a little bit more, parental involvement. So number 1, okay, findings point to 3 main ways that parents were involved with the financial aid process for school. Okay, so 1 is their vital role in finding aid and applying for it. Okay, so parents either have the knowledge to say, let's go on the websites and let's go on to, FAFSA.gov, and we're going to fill out the information. We're going to help you through it. The students, every single student, when you look at the research, if they have persisted, we're talking American Indian students here, their parents play a vital role in this whole process, sitting down with them, doing it together, and going through the process, applying for scholarships, doing the FAFSA, everything very much together as a family unit. Okay, not so much students, not so much mom saying, figure it out yourself, I got to go to work, bye. Which that happened to me. So this is families sitting down together doing it. Okay. Students also report a solid amount of guilt that they feel overburdening their parents with paying for college. Okay. So we've got students who join the National Guard in lieu of asking mom or dad to take out a parent loan to help pay for college. Students not necessarily knowing that they can take out student loans without parents being involved in the process, because it's such a tight-knit relationship. So legally speaking, the students can take out student loans, federal education loans, without having parents do a whole lot other than fill out the FAFSA form, right? Put their information on it. The students report guilt over that, okay? And the experience that some parents already had with financial aid, of course. So when we have students that are not first generation, parents have that cultural capital to help them through the process and say, well, I know how to do all this. I did it themselves. I did it myself. And when they have that level of cultural capital, it reduces student stress. They can do enough research to hopefully have enough financial aid so that it's sufficient and covers the cost of college, and also ensures that positive transition from high school into college. So a little bit more about parent involvement. So it's not a new theme in American Indian research. Like I said, it's often one of the first things that's reported related to education as a whole is parents being involved. Now, of course, we know that in high school, we highly encourage parent involvement, right? We want parents to come to programs and come to parent meetings. And if the teacher or the counselor needs to reach out to the parent, have a conversation. And then the student graduates from high school and gets on a college campus. And our college campuses, of course, we all run differently. We want the students there to be independent. And, you don't necessarily want mom calling for everything. And students are just kind of expected to, do things on their own at that point. And it's really important when we're thinking about access and completion with our different ethnic and racial groups to know that not every family works that way. If our goal is completion and access, so to get our American Indian students on campus and graduated, okay, it's important to remember that parents, family, and community, I have it right here, they have a very high cultural importance internally. And so it shouldn't be a surprise that it extends to higher education and financial aid as well. So we'll talk about this when we in a few minutes when we talk a little bit about recommendations. But it's important for parents to stay involved with their students' process, American Indian families, okay? And here's a quote that was taken out of some research that I thought was very important. So, connection for these Indian students, for their families, whether nuclear or extended, was so strong that they were willing to overcome many difficult situations, such as an unwelcoming environment, lack of academic preparation, and inadequate financial support. So the students, if we're looking at a success model of students that have made it onto the college campus, and they're there, they're ready to learn, they figured out the whole process. You know, a lot of the students, if you have conversations with American Indian students, a lot of times, they're completing a degree to come back and help their community. So if they're staying at college in their neighborhood, so if they're right there locally and their family's right there, maybe they're living at home, or if they are a couple of hours away, for example, and they're living on campus, as this says, they're going to overcome these difficult situations because they have a goal of getting that degree and coming back into your community and working and staying connected to family. And so students are willing to, overcome these difficult situations, but why present them with so many difficult situations? Okay. And the relationships with the parents are vital to ensure access in a successful transition to college, which includes the financial aid process. And we'll talk about the idea of transition in just a couple of minutes. Okay, so let's talk about the second research finding, and that is the importance of communication. Okay, so there's 4 main issues within the importance of communication. And when I do this research and offer some different tips and ways to help our students, I do this at the high school level and also the post-secondary level. And so some of the recommendations kind of come together and they're combined with some of the tips that we can do at the high school level, usually a senior level as well as college. So some of the issues students talk about is lack of communication about financial aid as a whole. Of course, if you work in a high school, that sometimes you do communicate that, but they just don't hear it. So that's a real life thing of saying, well, I had it on the announcements a couple of times, but I didn't listen to announcements. I was talking to my friend next to me. So that happens in the real world too. But lack of communication about financial aid as a whole. Don't forget, October 1st, the FAFSA form is open. This is how you go learn about scholarships. At the college level, this is where we have all our scholarship information. We'll talk about this in a few minutes, but is your scholarship information at your institution on your website in one cohesive place where it's easy to find and to understand and to apply? Or are there some scholarships listed in your financial aid section, some listed within your departments, some listed on the admissions page, just kind of broken up, and you've just got to look at everything to figure out what you have and how to apply. Okay. The need for more financial aid information earlier. This is a very common topic. And I have down here on the left, avoid the just-in-time approach. So that just-in-time approach means we're just getting them the information senior year, just in time to fill stuff out. So if we have students that are just learning about what the FAFSA form is, senior year of high school, that's kind of hard, especially for our American Indian students. Understanding that they suddenly have to fill out a federal form. And if you understand, American Indian student history with obviously the federal government and our education system, to suddenly learn that you've got to fill out this form senior year and it's the government, and that can be a little jarring for families. And so the information needed earlier is nice. Financial aid information not necessarily distributed fairly to all high school seniors. Not that this is something that you all, although I saw that there was a variety of folks on, so it's not necessarily something that we can all do something about, but I know that there are some folks on here making sure that all the high school seniors get it. And that's the need for us to think a little bit about our worldview and whether or not we're doing something subconsciously or not, we don't even mean to, but you keep pulling in, the top students into your office and saying, here's the scholarship information, here's the scholarship information, you're going to college, right? And so in my communicating with students in research, there was a feeling of it wasn't always distributed fairly to all high school seniors. And in addition, there wasn't always information given to the American Indian students on the high school campuses. So for example, if we're thinking about scholarships that are specific to American Indian students, not always given that out to the students, even high schools, where there's, a decent number of American Indian students. We're not talking like you're the one on campus, and, we're talking also about high schools where there's, a good number. So making sure that they have lots of resources about how to pay for college and anything that might be specific to them as an American Indian student. And students also report feeling a sense of hardship or burdening of bothering financial aid offices to ask for help. Not all of our students are going to, knock down your door and just be like, hi, I need help and I need you to come help me right now. Some of our students feel a little bit like they're burdening someone when they ask for help. So just making sure that we have that open door and that students understand they can come get help anytime. We're open to help you. So the third piece that emerged from research is personalized assistance. And this is also not new. There's been lots of other studies done outside of American Indian students of the need for personalized assistance when it comes to financial aid. So we've got a few topics up here, and I added a third topic when I was going back through this, and I forgot to change that title there. So it's 3 main topics. So the need for a personal advisor. Okay, that's a tough one because not all of our campuses have the folks to offer that. And the same goes in our high school campuses. If we look at for example, school counselor ratio to students, we're at, maybe 400 students to a school counselor. You can only do so much personal advising, but I'll talk about this in a few minutes, where you have career coaches and success coaches, which I know we have some on, and college advisors, they're wonderful additional resources to maybe help students to sit down with them and assist with this. We've moved, when I think about what we're doing in the high schools, we've moved somewhat from a financial aid presentation model where we just go into each individual high school, pre-COVID, of course, and set up in the cafeteria or the media center, and we're just have a presentation on how financial aid works. We've moved from we do those still, but also into FAFSA completion sessions, which is a little bit different. And so we may have within a high school, we may have several families who sign up for different time slots in the media center on computers to complete their FAFSA form. It's not quite one-on-one because we don't quite have the resources for that, but it is much more personal to say, okay, I think me personally, I can probably help 3 families, maybe 4 families at once do the FAFSA because they all have questions and you're jumping around. So you can't take too many on at a time. But if you're willing to spend the day there and you give everyone an hour and a half slot, you can, assist some families and give some personal assistance. So there are some ways to do that, even if it's not one-to-one. Okay. Personal or intrusive advising sessions while in college. So that means essentially checking in. Okay. And so where you have the staff and where you're able to reaching out to students, especially students maybe you might have identified as in danger of not completing, or that FAFSA form is not done. They keep getting stuff done late. They're coming to you and saying, I don't know how I'm going to pay for this. The idea of that is some sort of advising sessions while they're in college also. We tend to help our students senior year. And then we think, which, I've been guilty of this too. We think, well, you've done the FAFSA, you've gone through the whole process now, so you must be an expert, right? But when the students get on campus, for thinking American Indian students, the parents are not there if they're living on campus. Sometimes they're living at home if they're going to a local school, but they might be living on campus. Parents are not right there. And they're coming from a family environment where everyone works together to do this process. It's a very tight-knit community. And so it can be difficult for students to suddenly do this kind of on their own. So they would probably welcome some advising sessions to see where we're at with all of this. And then also having the same financial aid administrator during college. Some of our institutions do this, but I know some of our institutions don't also. And so it can be helpful to build that relationship if you have the same financial aid administrator assigned to certain students, the whole time they're at your institution. So if they're there for 2 years or 3 years, whatever the situation might be, having the same financial aid administrator can help. Not all of our students, this is cultural also, not all of our students are comfortable with walking into an office with someone brand new. And this is the same things I've heard stories from students in this research and otherwise. Well, I talked to so-and-so last year and I told her everything that was going on with my house, and I didn't even feel comfortable doing that. And now there's someone new and it wasn't in the notes in the system, and I don't really want to tell, the same thing again. So having that same person who kind of knows what's going on can be really helpful for students in the financial aid process. So stress and planning. So some main points mentioned by students: lack of sufficient financial aid to cover college costs and living expenses, which we'll talk about that in just a minute too. But students have reported that. This is where sometimes it can get interesting. Students have reported a lack of sufficient financial aid to cover college costs, and sometimes that's absolutely accurate. But we're also finding from research that sometimes it's a situation that students just don't know about the financial aid that's available to help apply for. Our students are filling out the FAFSA form. That's a relatively, I'm not going to say easy, but we can tell them to go to a website, go to FAFSA.gov. It's one form. You're applying for all kinds of federal and statewide grants with that, and also scholarships if we think about like the lottery scholarship. Scholarships in general can be very different, and that can be very confusing for students. Well, there's federal there's statewide scholarships, there's national scholarships, there's institutional scholarships, and there's local scholarships, and you got to go to all kinds of different places to figure out how to do that. Financial aid consuming too much time. So students repeatedly, especially students who are going semester by semester, saying, literally, I'm figuring out how to pay for school semester by semester. Okay, I've squeezed through, I got this semester covered. Next thing you know, it's time to figure out the next semester, and you're going back and forth with financial aid, and it's this stress thinking about how you're going to pay for the next semester, continued stress. Inequitable financial aid distribution among students. Okay, and so again, this is something that students mention, is not understanding why someone who they know they have a class with that they know seems like they perhaps got more financial aid than they did. Again, this is just student reporting some of the information. We know that sometimes there's different situations and families that students don't know about. Stress over verification. This is a piece of research that it's always interesting to do research when you find out things that you really were not expecting to find. I had not thought of the verification process with American Indian students, thinking about what it means. So I had a student say, well, it just made me so nervous because it's the government stuff, And again, if we're thinking about American Indian students and families and the history with the United States government and the education system, it can be a little stressful. So not necessarily, we can't always take the stress away, but giving them the information nice and early and not using the just-in-time approach, letting them have some of these words in their vocabulary as early as possible, such as verification, so that when it happens senior year or while they're in college, they might be selected later. It's not a new word. It's something that they understand that could happen at some point. Okay, so I just think it's important to include some student quotes and stuff too, to bring this back to, student-centric research. So it's been putting stress on me to make sure I've got payment in time. That way I don't get dropped from my classes. Where am I going to find the money? How am I going to get money to pay to make sure I have enough for school? And when I finally pay for it, how am I going to pay for everything else through the semester that I'm going to have to pay for, like food, gas, and all that other stuff? So that stress impacts academics, which we'll see in just a minute. Okay, so that fifth piece of research is transitional experiences. Okay, so it refers to the way that financial aid affects students' transition from high school to college, and that includes their first year in college. So when I think about transitional experiences, again, it's transitioning from senior year to college, and it also includes that first year of college. Okay, so students experience their GPA going down. So if they're focusing on financial aid and having to go kind of back and forth to the financial aid office. And that quote that you just read about, how am I going to pay for all this? The burden, it's just so stressful, might take away from your studies. GPA going down, student reported, specifically, a few students have reported to me, and this is the same with research, losing merit-based scholarships because GPA went down, which is going to add even more stress to being able to pay for all of this. Lack of sufficient financial aid to cover everything. And so, as I said before, sometimes they're just not finding or being awarded enough aid to cover things, and other times perhaps don't know about all of the aid that they could apply for, causing a shift in focus, as I just said, from academics, and can create stressful environment during transition. And if you are in an institution and you're constantly stressed out, obviously, about how you're going to pay for all of this, doesn't bode too well for completion. And then also the importance of parental involvement. So students report feeling lost during their first year of college, especially when they go to renew their FAFSA, and they don't necessarily have direct parental assistance. And also, legally, a lot of our financial aid offices can't talk to the parents unless the students fill out that privacy form that gives parents permission. And so that can be a really simple step to make sure, especially for students, I'm here to talk to you about American Indian students. So as you have students, and if you're collecting that data who are identifying as American Indian, triple check that their parents have a form. It's through different offices, but I'm thinking about the financial aid form at the moment. Thinking about making sure that they have that privacy form that gives the financial aid office, or whatever department you might be at, permission to talk to parents, just to make sure that you are including the family in the entire conversation as you can. Okay. And I think this, there's an example from a student that I wanted to share also. So and this happens on many campuses. So this was a 4-year institution, but there's a student living in a learning community on campus. And as we know, different campuses that have on-campus housing, they have different communities students can live in. So this is a specific learning community. And this student talked about, for her first year of college, it helped her transition greatly. It gives you a sense of community. It gives you a place of belonging. It can help tremendously for students that are going to be living on campus. And she received enough grant money from doing her financial aid to help pay for that. So her sophomore year of college, she was selected for verification. And for whatever reason, maybe her family did the FAFSA form incorrectly the first year, she lost the grant money. And so she had to move out of the learning community because there just wasn't enough financial aid to cover on-campus housing. And so she had to move home, and then became a commuter student, which of course can really impact, your on-campus experience. And so this is a situation of a student where if her family did her FAFSA wrong the first year, it's not like we can do a whole lot about it if it was done incorrectly. But the student really could have known about, they really could have benefited from learning about maybe some more scholarships, and just figuring out how they can help make that difference up. Okay. So a few comments from students before we get into some recommendations. So in general, lost about where to find scholarship information, and these comments are very much the same for high school and college level. So where do I find the scholarship information? I'm on the website. It seems like there's only a few listed. I had students tell me that their institution actually offered other scholarships as well, but they weren't all listed in like a cohesive list on the college's website, perhaps like in the financial aid section. They were scattered about under different departments. And there were some specific ones for American Indian students too, but they were not listed in the main scholarship section. And so the student ended up learning about the scholarship after they were on campus from one of their instructors. And so, it's not necessarily it's good to review that and just think, okay, good. Yeah, our institution's doing a great job with how we provide the information, or gosh, this is kind of difficult to find. Maybe this is something that we can work on. Maybe it's an easy fix. I say easy, relatively easy fix, not as big of a lift as other things, to help get the information to students easier. Didn't know colleges offer scholarships, and you can replace the word college with local organizations, etc. Students don't always know all of this information. They don't all know that our colleges offer scholarships, especially if we're thinking about a student with low cultural capital, first generation student. Parents want to help, they want to be involved, but the parent doesn't know that college offers scholarships, and they couldn't come to that one financial aid night senior year. Nobody else has ever told them about it. How are they intrinsically going to know that your institution offers scholarships? Didn't know what verification was. As I mentioned before, that was a common theme that I was even surprised about. Who thought about verification? They had no idea what it was and felt lost, especially if they're being selected for verification after they're already on campus and they don't have their parents with them. And on top of that, if you have American Indian students that feel like they're being a burden if they come onto your financial aid office and ask for help, that is a recipe for, not completing verification. And if they don't complete verification, they're not going to get financial aid. So it's also really important just to make sure that lots of different folks on your campus know what verification is, and how maybe you get selected. It can be just 5 minutes of information to different faculty and staff of, what verification is, because you never know who your student is going to end up talking to on campus. It could be their instructor when their class is over. I don't know if I'll be here next week. I don't know how to do verification. My class is, I might not get financial aid. Well, if the instructor's like, oh, okay, yeah, okay, well, verification, I don't know what you're talking about. That can be a big difference between, okay, well, I know a little about verification. You just were randomly selected and you've got to verify what you put on your FAFSA form. Let me make sure you have someone in financial aid's contact information. A lot of students remember their high school holding a financial aid night, but they couldn't attend. Thinking back to those questions that I had asked them, how did you come to learn about this? What methods or materials were you given about financial aid? Well, I remember our high school had a financial aid night, but there was one and I couldn't go. And so that was that. Okay. They remember clearly when a staff member sits down with them and assists them with the FAFSA or just answer questions. Very, very clear. They felt like financial aid events off campus would be a great addition. Okay. And there's a question I just saw that I'm going to go ahead and answer because it makes sense with where we're at. How do we know which students need verification? The financial aid office. So the students, when they're selected for verification, they will essentially get a letter, whether it's in the mail or electronically, maybe in their student accounts, to say you've been selected for verification. We're going to need X, Y, and Z documents from you in order to proceed with your financial aid. And so that just means that basically they got selected to verify what they put on their FAFSA form. A lot of students that are selected, it's just random. And then also on top of that, sometimes students are selected because they messed up their FAFSA form greatly. Now, verification is going to be changing because it has been identified federally really as an access issue, and it is an access issue. So verification is going to be changing, and students aren't necessarily all going to have to verify what was put on their FAFSA form. So that's going to become less of a burden, which is really good to know and good for our students. And if we're thinking about financial aid events, hopefully that answers your question. Let me know if it didn't. But if we're thinking about financial aid events off campus versus on campus, we are in the times of COVID, and now we are in the times of Delta. And so we aren't all doing these face-to-face, but we can do them virtually, and we can do different virtual things. It doesn't just have to be with the high school. With our American Indian students, there are a lot of community organizations. Some of our students are extremely involved with their churches, or there are just different American Indian centers. like, we like in Robeson County, for example, in Pembroke, there's lots of different resources and folks to reach out to provide information beyond just the high school. Okay, some students feel like financial aid was offered only to the top students, and getting it senior year is too late. Okay, and that is a little late in the game, right? Okay, so this is where if we were face to face, we would have like a bit of a conversation, but we'll just encourage you to reflect on your own for a minute. So pausing for reflection. Out of all the things we've talked about, what has surprised you in this data? Does it align with your experiences at work? What does it inspire you to explore more at your school, at your college? Okay. And how can it inform your efforts to hopefully create change with your American Indian students, and how they're able to, how we're able to increase? I said at the beginning, 1% of post-secondary students nationwide identify as American Indian. So how can we increase that, right? How can we make that bigger? And that is correct. Dr. Ramirez, so many similar issues with our Latinx and Hispanic students and families. Yep, and we've talked about that before, Juanas and I, and there's a lot of similarities and crossovers for our American Indian students and our Latinx Hispanic students. Okay. So you can take, go ahead.
No, I was just going to jump in really quick, just because I would have to definitely concur with Dr. Juan Ramirez's assessment. I think even after reading Overcoming Educational Racism in the Community College, there is a section that talks about Native American student needs. And so between that one, the one for Latinx, the one for Black students, and even the one for low-income white students, every single thing, it says it in its own way, but it all comes down to relationships. And I think based on what you've shared, that's what it just screams. It's like, we have to have those relationships there, and it can't be a last minute relationship. It has to be, it has to be early enough to create that trust and engagement. And I think in the book, it even talks about, making sure you mentioned this as far as the families being involved, and, not neglecting, them wanting to be informed, and, as much as possible, just building those relationships. So just really, I think that's just the biggest focus. Like, if you want these students, they have to feel like they belong and they're needed, and it's about building those relationships.
Yep, 100%. And that comes to us talking about the campus climate also, with, like you just said, Jairo, with making sure they feel comfortable on campus. And they're not going to feel comfortable on campus if they get there and they're immediately expected to sever communication with parents as far as including them in this whole process. And, if they don't feel like there's a campus climate where they can be successful and have, other students that look like them and that have the same cultural experiences to communicate with and move through this process together. And I think in the chat, someone was wondering, what is the name of the paper that you cited again? Or the book? Which one was it?
Yeah, so, but I could put a link in the chat. I'll do that real quick. So if anybody else is interested, they can look it up.
Perfect. Okay.
But Dr. Corey, before you go on, I do have one question.
Yes.
Another thing that I've read is especially as it pertains to Native American students, is recognizing and celebrating their heritage, and doing it authentically and genuinely, right? So not just saying like, oh, it's whatever this day and then that's that, right? So it's like really doing that. Do you have any suggestions as far as best practices? Because Native Americans aren't monolithic. There's, all kinds of different tribes and different, groups that they may identify and belong with. Do you have any suggestions as far as like how to approach that?
So I'm wondering, I'm going back through the chat. Is there, well, so I guess there wouldn't be. So I was trying to see who was in here. I do know that UNC Pembroke does a good job, from what I've seen, of having different events on their campus. They have, which, a lot of our campuses do, but they also have an American Indian student center, where students can come together and plan different events. There can be student organizations. Probably it's a good idea for this to be student-led. with different things they want to do on their campus. If you are aware of American Indian students that are already on your campus, helping them to create student organization and find out what sort of events they'd like to have. I do know that, like I said, UNC Pembroke has a lot of different organizations. They've got different events on their campus. They've got different dances. They've got powwows that happen obviously in Robeson County also. I do know there's some folks on here from Robeson Community College. Is there anyone who wants to chime in too with anything that you've seen in your community that you feel like is a good event? You're welcome to unmute if you'd like to. This can be a whole conversation.
You can either just unmute or use the chat, or if you even want to do the reactions and raise your hand, and we can call on you that way too.
Hi everyone. My name is Taylor Strickland. I'm actually Lumbee. I just graduated from UNCP in May, and I was a part of NASO. So that was a big thing that we did for our students. We have ACES, fraternity, sorority.
Taylor, can you talk a little bit about what ACES is and what the acronyms are for the different ones you just talked about? I don't know if everyone knows what they are.
ACES is American Science and Engineering, I think. NASA is the Native American Student Organization. So I was a part of that for like 2 or 3 years throughout my 4 years. We do have a powwow every year in March. And NASA, we really just get together. We have the involvement fair. We were always in that as well. Just different events that we had on campus that were geared toward Native students. We have a building there called Old Main. So we were always hanging out there. We have a museum there, which is for Southeast American Indians. So those were just some great resources that we had. We're trying to get those things started here as well at RCC.
And the I just forgot you the building you just said, the Old
Main.
The what? Sorry.
Old Main.
Old Main. Yeah, that building has really interesting history too. So there's a lot of history in just our community. Here, Taylor, do you know the history of Old Main? Did you want to at UNCP?
So I know when UNCP was started, Old Main was the first building that was built back in 1887. So the building was, now it's like our come together for Native students, but when it originally started, it was to train Native teachers to be teachers. And that's how UNCP was started back in 1887. It was just a training facility because there weren't any schools for Native people back then. So Lumbee people came together and created their own schools and their own teachers. And Old Main was just the center of that initiative.
Thank you. There's, like I said, there's a lot of really interesting history that we have in North Carolina. Even, I live in Wilmington, so I'm usually thinking about Southeast North Carolina. And I've spent a lot of time in Robeson County over the years for work and doing different things. And, we have a lot of rich history, just even looking at UNC Pembroke. And so I do think that if you're looking for different ideas, I would head over to UNCP's website, and take a look at some of the different organizations that Taylor mentioned. We put some over in the chat with NASO and ACES. Taylor mentioned the involvement fair, powwows, and just different, and again, they have Old Main as a location for students to kind of congregate, but, having that space for students, and the organization, but also the physical space for our students to kind of come together and, hang out and, plan things, whatever it is they'd like to do.
Yeah. And Dr. Corey, I just have another question though, as it relates to what you're talking about as well. So these strategies and the things that you're talking about, and I know I mentioned relationships, and I think that was more so, was that more so gained towards students just finishing high school? Like, do those same strategies, or do you have different strategies for students that may be coming back to school, maybe after a couple years?
Yeah, they should really, and they really should be all the same strategies. I'm going to tell you, there's really not research out there for, American Indian students if we're thinking about them coming back. So if we're thinking about, non-traditional or the adult learner, good luck on finding a whole lot of research for students specifically also as it relates, like I said, like the financial aid process. There's just not a whole lot. And I know I haven't looked at that. Mine was specifically for students that went straight from high school into college. But I would imagine that a lot of the recommendations would be the same. If we think about that space in between high school and college, though, and what may have happened during that time, this is the same for all of our students, or what may have caused them to kind of take that break, that communication piece and having the conversation about what happened during that time period can be really vital. Again, we're talking about students that are very family oriented. There could be that their parent or grandparent could be someone in the nuclear family or extended family who was sick. And, you're putting your education on hold because you're going to take that time to, take care of your family, go to work, do whatever needed to be done to help with your family during those years. Or, could be that a student, got pregnant senior year of high school and now they're coming into college a couple years later and they're a parent, and so that adds a new layer of things with childcare, and different things. So, just what happened, why did that break happen? And then also, what happened during that break. But if you don't build trust with your students, as you were saying, they're not going to come to you and tell you. I mean, there's just from my experience, there can be a big difference with students culturally with what they want to come and lay out for you and what they'd really rather hold on. They're not all of our students, as I said, are going to walk into your office and be like, well, verbal, this is where we're at. This is everything that happened. And I just need someone right now to kind of help me. That is the opposite of what you're going to have from some students. And so it's just important to remember that not all of our students are going to tell you what's going on if they haven't, built that trust. So if you want them on campus and you want them there and you want them to graduate, you got to take different approaches to all of this. So there's some recommendations up here right now that are related to kind of school counselors and school administrators. And the next slide is going to talk a little bit about financial aid administrators. But the general idea of all of this is the same, no matter how you're working with students, whether it's, at the secondary level or post-secondary. Welcoming assistance from parents with the financial aid process. If you're doing some things virtually right now and you're thinking about having, Zoom conversations one-on-one with students, invite the parents to have the conversation too. Not too hard to invite them to. You can just, have them be part of the conversation. And, if you're having a face-to-face conversation and the parents can't be there for whatever reason, you can invite them in through Zoom also. We all know how to work Zoom now and whatever, go to a webinar. We kind of all know how to do these things. We all struggle with the mute button, but we can do these things. If you're having a workshop, record it. Easy thing to do. A lot of us are doing this now. So COVID has caused us to do some of these recommendations already. So record it so parents can view on their own time so they can stay involved with the whole process. There's a lot of free resources that exist from state entities, Department of Education, Bureau, which we'll talk about that just in a few minutes, Bureau of Indian Affairs. There's local college personnel, there's lots of free resources to help you put on programs or to offer information, printables, stuff like that. Make sure that you are checking yourself, which I think we all need to do from time to time. Make sure you're checking yourself and you're providing the information to all the students and not just a select, few. So you're fair with all of that. Avoid that just-in-time approach. You will never hear a student complain that they heard about financial aid too often. Doesn't matter what the student is, they did not hear about the FAFSA form and scholarships, and here's where you do this, and this is when you do it, and this is why you do it. Too often, didn't happen. More often, so you can think about getting involved with your local high schools more and providing the information. Extending the offer, and make sure you're explaining student loans, verification. I'm going to move through these a little faster looking at the time. And the administrators, not that any of us can get our hands on, school administrators necessarily, but we need to encourage our school counselors and college advisors and career coaches and whoever else to attend financial aid trainings yearly, either through your financial aid office on your campus. Your CFNC reps can offer this stuff too, just free to provide, some training on new things that's come up. There's a lot of free resources. So, as we can tell our administrators, a lot of people need financial aid training because it affects everything. So if we're thinking about financial aid administrators specifically, we went through a few of these already. Make sure that scholarship information is clear on the website, and specifically American Indian student scholarships, as you know about them. Remember that not all of our American Indian students are federally recognized, including, right? And so not everyone's eligible for federal tribal funding. So not all of our American Indian students are getting, federal funding to help them with their education, because they might not be federally recognized for a variety of different reasons. So that's important to remember too. Offer that verification information. It can be on your website. It can be a handout. And we talked about one financial aid advisor for the student each year. Okay, it's a family process. And so we went through a lot of these, and that personalized assistance, intrusive counseling sessions, as we can think about that. So steps to implement. And this says high school, but again, this can be, all the way around here. Okay. So consider holding multiple events. So again, remember, we had students say, oh yeah, I remember that the high school had one financial aid workshop, and it was probably a financial aid counselor from your school, from a different college, who was there giving the presentation. Yeah, they had that one and I couldn't go, so I just missed all the information. Okay. We're doing a lot of stuff virtual now. We can hold more than one, record it, so they have the information and they can access it. Planning for parent nights, parent lunch and learns, parent breakfast. All of our parents have different work schedules, right? And this can be done virtually also. So if you're thinking about making sure that you're involving our American Indian families, we mentioned recording the sessions. And then you can offer information to students during the day too. It doesn't always just have to be to parents, although I have found that providing financial aid information it gets absorbed more from parents. Sometimes students, it's like this. They're trying to get it, but it's a lot of information. Avoiding that just-in-time approach, we talked about that, different grade levels. You can involve different organizations. Consider bringing back past students. So if you are invited onto a college campus or onto a high school campus, just for example, to provide some information on financial aid, consider bringing a current student with you, if you can drag one with you, and talk a little bit about what I wish I'd known about financial aid. It's that near peer effect, right? So it's not always, me, a tad bit older, than the high school students, giving them information. It's the same as their mom telling them, they're not always getting it. Sometimes they get it from someone closer to their age. So, or consider having some of your current students do a recording. It's also a great way to advertise your school. A recording about what they wish they'd known about financial aid senior year of high school, and offer it to the different high schools. I'll bet you they'll share it with their students. American Indian parents want to be involved in this process, and involve our families. Okay, make sure you notify folks of different events you're having multiple times and in multiple ways. And don't forget about doing those assessments and surveys so that we can improve each year with what we're doing. And this is the same for the college. This is the college implementation steps, not too much different here. Review how schools offer scholarship information. We went over some of this information already, a couple different slides, but the idea is different steps. We've got step 1, plan and review, okay, of what you currently do. Step 2, think about how you disseminate information to our families, okay. Step 3, assistance and culture. So you're thinking about, now that you've planned, you've reviewed what you currently do. Okay, this is how we want to disseminate information. And now you can think about, the actual assistance of what you're going to be offering. So maybe peer counselors or advisors. If you have an American Indian Student Center, or if you don't have one, think about creating one, and use this center to make sure that you're providing lots of information virtually, multiple events, recording it. Let's talk about it. Who can we bring in to help? Can we have FAFSA completion events? Are you participating in FAFSA Day? And having different events throughout the year. And that includes student loan repayment presentations. So one of the things that we hear from students is, well, I have these student loans, but no one's really told me how repayment works. And so some of our institutions wait till senior year or as they're graduating. So second year. So as they're, finishing up and they're graduating from college to tell you how repayment works for their student loans. We need to tell them how repayment works for their student loans as they're borrowing, or maybe before they borrow, so they understand that. And just try to get involved, try to get faculty involved if you can with offering information. Because like I said before, you never know who students are going to go to ask for that. So how does this meet their needs? This is my last thing here. How does this meet their needs? Okay, so we talked about the need for parental involvement, okay? So this meets that need by offering more parent programming, involving them with those Zoom sessions, notifying parents if you're going to have a program, recording any information you might want, getting your current students to talk about what they wish they'd known about financial aid, especially if you have American Indian students on campus. What do they wish they knew when they went through the process? Send a little recording over to the high school, see if they want to share it with their students. And again, it's a great way to advertise your school also. Make sure students are feeling comfortable on your campus with those student organizations and figuring out how to involve parents with that. So we talked about the need for better and earlier communication. Get involved with those high schools before senior year. If you're someone who's on here right now, who's someone who can do that, and it's part of your role, get involved with them as early as 9th grade and get some of this terminology in front of them nice and early to avoid that just-in-time approach, and make sure you're giving it out to everyone fairly, and everyone is allowed and welcome to come to different programs, including parents. Personalized assistance. And so there's different ways we can do that. We talked about those FAFSA completion programs. Involve your career coaches, your college advisors. Make sure they have the same financial aid administrator every year, and make sure you're giving them specific scholarships for American Indian students. And you can learn about some more resources at the Bureau of Indian Education. So you can Google that, and that'll be there. So the stress in planning, okay, we talked about the lack of sufficient financial aid. Sometimes it's just a lack of information. Knowing about it earlier and being able to apply for aid to cover your expenses can reduce stress right there. The transitional experiences, we know that it can be a distraction from academics. If I'm worrying about how I'm going to pay for it and how I'm going to put gas in my car and how I'm going to eat, I'm not necessarily focusing on the paper you want me to do next week. I've got to figure out some other stuff. And so it's important in that transition. And so if we think about more financial aid awareness can equal more aid being applied for and awarded, and more students graduating from high school and enrolling in college. And if they have a positive transitional experience, hopefully that means more college graduates. So I appreciate everyone attending. I know we're at 5 minutes over. I'm so sorry. If you have more questions, I'll stay. Feel free to unmute yourself or unchat. Send me a chat, and otherwise I'll pass this back over to Hyro.
Yes, thank you, Dr. April. We really appreciate you doing this and sharing this valuable information that's sorely needed. I've done a lot of presentations where we mention and we talk about Native Americans. A lot of times they even have to prove they exist. And so a lot of times they're forgotten about just because they tend to be a smaller population of folks. Just again, as much as possible, again, reaching out to those folks, building those relationships. I think the biggest thing as well is, I read a long time ago in this book, Why Smart People Do Stupid Things or Make Stupid Mistakes or something like that. And in one of the chapters, it talked about, it said, ask questions and ask more. It said, assumptions, it says questions don't hurt, assumptions do. So again, just trying to figure out like how we can help, our students as much as possible. And not only our students, right, our colleagues, right, because we have colleagues that identify with different tribes and different groups. And so, just making sure that we're, reaching out to them and seeing what kind of support they may need, and, just doing everything we can. So, no, thank you for this. I have two things. One is I put in the chat a link to a post assessment. It's 7 questions, I think, and it should take about 5 minutes or less, unless you just really want to think through it or add suggestions. Well, I would love for y'all to fill that out for us, and any comments, suggestions you want to make. If you want to see Dr. April again, and if it's something we can work out, this is something you found valuable, please put that in the comments or suggestions, so then that way we can work that out. The other part to this is we have, of course, other workshops down the road. 1 in 2 weeks in particular is how to help African-American students in the community college. So if you're interested in that, there's still some slots available. If you know yourself or somebody else that may be interested in participating, I'm gonna go ahead and put both of those links. One is the first link is to that workshop in 2 weeks. The second link is to the other workshops that we're offering through the Student Success Center. We're here for you. We want to support all of you educators, and in any way we can. So please, if you have ideas for professional development, please reach out to us. Let us know things that you're interested in. So for the spring, we can get those things planned to help you even more. And so again, thank you, Dr. April, again, for being here today. I know you said you're willing to stay on for a little bit to answer any questions, so I'll turn it back over to you. If anybody has any questions, feel free. I'm gonna go ahead and stop the recording here, though, just in case. And if there's not no question, I'll just dead space, and we'll go from there. Okay.
Sure. And I thought I